thought it'd be fun to sit down today and look at all the games that have gone from iconic and just absolutely fantastic to trash over the years. I guess fun is the wrong word for this. Morbidly fun. The state of the franchises that we're gonna look at today is a good reflection of where the gaming industry is now, especially because games die over the dumbest shit. Some from overpromising and underperforming, others changes in dev teams, and worst of all, the corporate greed that leads to unfinished games or half-assed renditions of what they used to be. I feel like it should go without saying, but a lot of what I'm gonna be covering today is highly opinionated. And like always, I've done my best to put together facts as well as popular consensus for a lot of the topics that we're gonna be going through, of course with my commentary to make things interesting. And also, if there's a game that you don't want spoiled, skip it using the timestamps. Let's start off with a spicy one. Assassin's Creed. If Assassin's Creed isn't dead already, it's on its last legs with its kneecaps blown out. To me, what killed it was a combination of things, okay? And I think a lot of people will disagree with me on this one because technically, if you look at the numbers and everything like that, if you look at the facts, it shows differently. Matter of fact, Mirage didn't do half bad, being Ubisoft's biggest gen launch of the time of its release, according to them, of course. Take that with a grain of salt, because I couldn't find any solid numbers on its sales from a credible source. But there are many arguments to be made against the state of the franchise ever since they switched gears into their full-blown RPG style gameplay. Plus, with their universally hated releases recently, Ubisoft is under a huge microscope and they're being criticized heavily for their shitty business practices. This leads me to believe that if the next Assassin's Creed is a shell of a game, a flop, burning garbo, this is gonna be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Let's dig a little deeper into some of the stuff that I just mentioned. The original series was only supposed to be a trilogy, with the story pretty much mapped out for Desmond, the main protagonist in the present day portions of the game, to defeat Abstergo, whatever their name was. They had a beginning, middle, and end plan. Every good story, no matter how you chop it up and present it, needs a beginning, middle, and end, and this is where I think it first got muddled. The success of the first two games meant Ubisoft wanted more. They didn't want the series to end on a spaceship or wherever it was supposed to end at first, so they scrapped those plans and killed off our boy Desmond. I know there's a lot of OG fans of the series that go, oh my gosh, we never got a satisfying finish with Desmond and stuff, and I don't think the sadness was really because we loved Desmond or we loved the Desmond portions of the game as a whole, as a community. A lot of people actually didn't like the Desmond portions of the original games, but I think what people are longing for is a satisfying finish to what they thought was going to be a very interesting story. It feels really butchered, almost like how Game of Thrones fans were really disappointed with the ending that they got. There were a lot of differences with Ubisoft and the creative director at the time of the original games, so they parted ways or the dude got fired. I don't know what happened behind the scenes. But Assassin's Creed then took off on its own little adventure for how many games can we milk for this series. And don't get me wrong, more doesn't always equal bad. The problem persists when you start putting quantity over quality. Unity is a prime example of why this was never going to work. It was the result of pushing out yearly releases with quality out the window. It was so clearly unfinished when it came out, it was practically unplayable with the amount of bugs on release. Rogue, Unity, and Syndicate released within about a year of each other, which is kind of ridiculous. Individually, I actually don't think the games were horrible, but it was hard to enjoy them because of their back-to-back-to-back rapid release schedule that they were putting them on. It made them feel extremely repetitive on top of already having horrible bug issues. And it was after Syndicate that Ubisoft went, maybe we should pump the brakes on this a bit. The revamp and changes of the series with Origins was necessary in my opinion, but the way it was done left a bad taste in my mouth because it took away a lot of what made Assassin's Creed Assassin's Creed. First off, the original games heavily highlighted conspiracies and pseudosciences, and honestly, I can't say that I've noticed that emphasis on that on the new ones, but it might just be me because I don't take the time to explore every nook and cranny of a 700-hour game that is really bland and boring. Secondly, you are an assassin. It's literally in the name of the game. If you stab somebody in the neck, you expect them to die. That sounded so dark. Adding leveling and skill tree RPG elements to this game made no sense to me at the time. Now I have to make sure I'm a higher level than the guy I'm stabbing in the neck, or else I'll just tickle him and he turns around and eradicates my existence. And no, I'm not saying those mechanics are bad, okay? What I'm saying is I don't think they have a place in these types of games. It's like if you added some of those mechanics to a Hitman game. Oh yeah, good job shooting the guy in the face without getting noticed, but it's too bad he's a much higher level than you, so your bullet was made of foam and disintegrated before it got to him. How about you try grinding out a couple levels and specking into lead bullets, you idiot? It just doesn't make sense. But I gotta give credit to them. Even though I didn't think it made sense, somehow it worked, and they still made a pretty decent game with Origins, which I enjoyed up until about 20 hours or so. Then my problem turned into the problem that I have with 90% of Ubisoft games. You hit a grind wall that they put there solely to make their game longer than it is. The Ubisoft open world formula is so fucking repetitive, but they inject it into every single game. They found their little gold mine, their bread and butter, and over the years, they didn't improve it for the sake of the fans. They improved it for the sake of making money. Tell me if this sounds familiar, okay? Great introduction to a story, which leads you into an open world that is vast and beautiful, but very empty, lots of traveling. Climb a tower to reveal the tasks in the area on the map. Defeat a bunch of bad guys in a camp to claim the camp for the good side. Do you want to skip the side quest because you're tired of feeding the sheep or killing the same guys over and over again? Well, that's too damn bad because you're not high enough level to do this main quest, so go feed the fucking sheep again, you loser. You little chore boy. I just described 30 Ubisoft games. I'm not saying that the formula itself is bad. It's the amount of fluff and filler and bullshit they make you sit through that's bad. Side quests shouldn't make you feel like you're doing chores. They should be an addition to the story that's enjoyable and respects your time. Good examples of games that do this formula, but they do it right, are Ghost of Tsushima and Horizon Forbidden West. In both those games, side quests feel rewarding. Like if I didn't do this, I would be missing out on bits of the story. But with Ubisoft games, it's like they said, how can we spend less money developing worlds and missions and side quests while still making the games an acceptable length for the price? With filler, with fluff, with bullshit. As much as Origins was decent, Odyssey was a cash grab, copy and paste of the same shit, and that's when I stopped respecting Assassin's Creed games. You could copy my homework, just change it a bit, head ass. Mirage was supposed to be a callback to the roots, but the gameplay was stale, a bit jank, and repetitive as well. They just haven't quite grasped the charm and personality that the old ones brought to the table. For reference, so that you guys know, my favorites are Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Tony Hawk games. The Tony Hawk games succeed. Why am I saying it like Tony Hawk games succeeded with the rise of popularity in skating culture around the time that they first started releasing. With physics being Jesus Christ. Exactly. With physics being arcadey and bringing a lot of uniqueness to the table, recognizable cameos, great level design, and sick nasty soundtracks, those games really stood out as heavy hitters in that era. I would have said they fizzled out naturally without a defining nail in the coffin, so to speak, because those styles of games were simply not as popular over time, but Activision had to come through and leave a flaming shitbag on my porch to prove me wrong. That shitbag is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. When Activision realized they were losing the license to the Hawk games, they just couldn't leave it alone. They saw the money bags and rushed out a completely unfinished pile of garbaggio. From shit physics to bland level design to something as simple as the UI being absolute like bad, horrible, Activision successfully killed the franchise once and for all. Or did they? Dun dun dun. Thankfully for this one, there could be a light at the end of the shit tunnel. The release of the remastered Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 did really well, actually, although I can't speak on it too much since I never played the games myself. And more importantly, the Hawk man himself, the Hawk. Don't say it. Don't say it. She's a horrible person. Is said to have hinted at a new game in development. It's probably a load of horseshit, but I like to think positive sometimes. According to VideoGameChronicle.com, he said, and I quote, "I wish I could tell you more, but I can tell you that I've been talking to Activision again. We're working on something. It'll be something that the fans truly appreciate." Twisted Metal. Sticking to the beloved arcade genre, let's take a look at Twisted Metal. This one's gonna be a little hard for me to talk about because I never played any of those games in their prime. I mean, I was fresh out of the womb by the time Twisted Metal 3 was coming out. But somehow I always knew who Sweet Tooth was, or at least his deadly iconic ride, because I grew up around video games. Twisted Metal was a concept born from death, destruction, explosions, and chaos, which is fucking awesome. The original game reportedly sold over 1 million units and only cost about $850 to make. $850,000 to make. Imagine that. Which is still ridiculously cheap even for the time that it was developed in. Basically, it made Sony a ton of money, so they went on to make 8 games in the series, which honestly all did pretty well, with the exception of the universally hated Twisted Metal 3. Oh, and there was a spin-off that I should probably mention that was absolutely atrocious. They took the game that had very adult contents and violence at its core and thought, let's make a spin-off that's directed at kids. Twisted Metal Small Brawl was a horrible mistake from the start for reasons I think should be obvious to everyone. It was a watered down mess of a game. This was undoubtedly a cash grab aimed at kids with parents that didn't let them get the Twisted Metal games, like the strict parents that were like, oh, that's M for mature, you're a child. Probably how it should be, to be honest. This one was E for everything sucked about it. Twisted Metal 3 was also a mess, but it was most notably because of the fact that it was developed by a new studio. You could tell just from looking at the game that they were handed a live grenade and didn't know what to do with it. Do they hold on to it? Do they put it down? Do they kick it? The right answer, my friends, is to throw it. You throw the grenade. But they did not, and this to me was the death of the franchise because it created a gap in the popularity of the game. Like the time frame between when the good games came out was just a long time, and although there were games that released after this one that many say they love and brought the series back to its roots, by the time they brought it back, the style of game just wasn't as popular and the franchise never fully recovered. Duke Nukem. This is another game that died for what I think are similar reasons as the Twisted Metal franchise, where in its prime it was amazing because it capitalized on its unique and violent nature that really resonated with the adults of the era. You bunch of sick fucks, you. But in the case of Duke Nukem, the long-awaited soft reboot of the series was one of the worst received games of 2011. Duke Nukem Forever had outdated writing for sure, but even if that's what the fans of this series had been wanting, the development hell it went through really wore down the main gameplay and mechanics as well. I mean, it was the same thing for me with Dookie Boy as it was Sweet Tooth. I knew exactly who he was when I was growing up, because he was iconic. I would quote him saying naughty things like, I'm gonna rip off your head and shit down your throat or something like that. You know, normal things that kids were saying back in the 360 days. That's horrible. Unfortunately, he did not get the treatment he deserved being the icon he was and was given a half-baked game with lazy writing and underwhelming gameplay. Goodbye, Duke Nukem Forever. Get it? Mass Effect. The original Mass Effect trilogy was a thrill. It was some of the most baller lines that I've ever seen in a game. Although the first one didn't technically break any charts because BioWare was a smaller company, they had a small niche audience at the time. Over time, those games grew in popularity so much with each release until it became known for being one of the best RPG trilogies of all time. Choices you made in the first game carried over into the next two, really solidifying your impact and immersion as a player into these games. And although they're not known for having the best gameplay, the dialogue and choices really give you the freedom to shape your own story. I mean, they went ham with dialogue lines. They had like, I think for the first one, 20,000 lines, and by the third one, they had like 60,000 lines. That coupled with the branching storylines that really led you completely different ways depending on your choices. I mean, they did a lot to make this game really, really good. I've said this before, but the criteria for a game to be an RPG isn't all that complicated. Have a story, add some choices, add a skill tree, bam, plaster that all over the news. But it doesn't automatically mean that the game will be a good RPG. Prime example, Dragon Age Veilguard. Since RPGs have kind of skyrocketed forward as arguably the most popular game genre out there, a lot of games have maneuvered or snaked their way into the genre, like Assassin's Creed that I talked about earlier. But it takes the ones with the big cojones, the passion and the time and the effort to make something that is deserving of being called one of the best. Mass Effect delivered on all fronts. Compelling storytelling, engaging narrative, memorable characters, rich lore, atmosphere exploration, engaging quests, memorable soundtrack. I mean, I could go on for a while. But the most important out of all of them that made it stand out in the genre was player agency. Choices that truly, truly mattered and influenced the world and characters around you. So what the fuck happened to Andromeda? Aside from the fucking dog-ass facial animations that everybody made fun of them for, the game was a mid-tier, watered-down Diet Temu version of its predecessors. Damn it, I almost nailed that line. I'm keeping it. Player agency, which I harped on its importance before, just wasn't very present. There weren't many long-lasting decisions or payoffs or effects throughout the game. And a big indicator for this is the fact that they only had one ending. Yes, technically, different choices meant that different people and details changed, but essentially you had a very linear game from beginning, middle to end. On top of that, all the connections to the original series were reduced down to Easter eggs. If they wanted this to be a standalone title that wasn't connected to the previous three, why not make it its own IP? I think it's because it's easier to sell Andromeda with Mass Effect plastered on in front of it. You can still create a successful title and have it be the same universe as Mass Effect without trying to write the coattails of the previous games. You just have to make it good. Look at Remedy and what they've done with their games. You got Control, you got Alan Wake, you got Quantum Break, each a successful series through their own volition, and they're all part of the same universe. Remedyverse. Damn, they make some good games, bro. I'm not saying Andromeda was a cash grab because I don't believe it was created with that intention, but I do think its failure is more attributed to the development issues that it had. BioWare faced staffing changes and leadership issues during the development of that game, and what was the other one? Anthem. That's what it was. I looked over there because I have it, unfortunately. And of course, all of this made it go into the dreaded development hell, which in turn pooped out whatever Andromeda ended up being. Dragon Age. Speaking of RPGs, oh boy. Actually, for this one, just watch the video that's linked up above somewhere because I'm not gonna beat this dead horse. I've already talked about it. Watch it, it's good, I promise. Saints Row. Saints Row is one of the few GTA clones that managed to stick around for more than just a single release. It started off as a highly serious game, and although it was heavily inspired by GTA gameplay and style, it managed to bring its own flavor and pizzazz to the table, making it stand apart. So much so that it reached platinum hits on Xbox 360, selling over 2 million copies. Saints Row 2 didn't do half bad as well, following the success of the first one, selling over 3.4 million copies and bringing more fans to the now Saints Row series. Then the devs did the unexpected. They pulled a whambo cambo combo on us, and they took a serious gangster open world game that turned into a unserious gangster open world game. Actually, unserious doesn't even begin to cover the amount of buffoonery that happens in that game. They went overboard with the antics and the dildos, and surprisingly, it was well received. I say surprisingly because nobody could have predicted this outcome. Usually when a game franchise takes a turn as hard as Saints Row did, the OG fans of the series throw a tantrum over it. But the changes were actually welcomed in this case, which I think was partially due to the insanely awesome marketing behind the game before its release. And so Saints Row 3 skyrocketed Saints Row out from behind the GTA shadow and solidified its spot in its own little weird fetish satire corner of the genre. Although Saints Row 3 is the most popular on paper, selling over 5 million copies, 1, 2, and 3 all kind of battle each other for the most beloved Saints Row spot for the fans. And then Saints Row 4 wasn't bad. It continued the story and antics from the previous game, but for some reason it wasn't able to capitalize on the hype and didn't sell nearly as well. I actually don't really know why this was the case. It wasn't poorly reviewed or anything like that. Maybe the marketing was worse. Maybe people had moved on from the genre and wanted something less gimmicky. I don't really know. Sprinkle in some tiny games here and there, and the next big installment was Gat Out of Hell, which just fell short of being a good game. In my opinion, it felt like it was grasping at straws to push the limits and recreate what they had done with 3, but it was just bare bones compared to the other games, and it just wasn't fun. The real culprit in this murder mystery, though, is actually the latest Saints Row game, the self-proclaimed reboot simply named Saints Row. That game was garbage, doo-doo for poo-poo puffs, the world's worst game in 2022, and the saddest part was that I was having a lot of fun with it at first. It just was so disappointing. They introduced a new crew and what felt like an exciting new world to cause chaos in. The characters were okay, nothing exceptional, but they had potential. The story was a little cheesy, but not in an exciting way, more like in a cringe way. But the gameplay seemed like it could be the thing that tied it all together to make it an actually decent game. Unfortunately, though, everything goes to shit about 4 hours in. This was my experience, of course. I encountered game-breaking glitches, bugs, and the more I explored the world, the more I realized how empty it was. The facade had faded, and I realized the only reason I was having fun or enjoying it at all was because the nostalgia glasses were fogging up the game for me. Disappointingly, the game was nothing more than a money grab aimed at cash cows they called their existing fans. It wasn't a callback or a revival of the series. It was a greed-filled fuckery where they jumped into the already dug-up grave. I'm being quite literal here, by the way. The studio that made the game actually went under after this release. Volition shut down shortly after the release of Saints Row, and it's actually sad to see a studio that brought such iconic games to the table shut down. I can't really defend what they did with the reboot at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was the doing of a publishing studio pushing for a release before the game was actually fully realized. Given that the publisher was changed from THQ on Saints Row 3 to Deep Silver for the latest release. This, of course, is all speculation. Battlefield. My commentary on this one is going to be as tiny as the penis of the man who owns this truck, since the only Battlefield that I played in its prime was 2042, unfortunately. Let's start from the beginning. I was born in the year 1996 in a small country named... I'm just kidding. 1996 is an important year, though, for FPSs because Quake World had just released, setting the stage for multiplayer shooters. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six followed in 1998, Counter-Strike in 1999. Some heavy hitters in the FPS world were born. I'd like to think that I was an inspiration for those. My chaotic energy bringing that into the world. I don't know what the fuck I'm saying. The first Battlefield came out in 2002, a year before the first Call of Duty, and it made a huge splash, bringing large-scale war to people's PCs. You had vehicles, landscapes, team-based combat. It really had a lot going for it and progressively grew in popularity as games were released. The most popular Battlefield game was Battlefield 5, although many consider 3 to be the best because of its maps and gun variety. If you disagree, don't shoot the messenger because I never played either of them in their prime, so I'm saying this based off of some gaggle of Reddit comments. And then 2042 came out. It was another game that I already covered in depth, but let me summarize it for you. The devs specifically said that they wiped the campaign from the game because they wanted to focus on multiplayer, and then released a game where the multiplayer didn't fucking work at all. They got rid of a bunch of features in the game that people actually loved and introduced bugs instead. So what did they do with all the time they saved from not working on the campaign? They jerked off to all the money they were about to scam people out of course. Speculation. Today, Battlefield 2042 is okay. It's not a bad game, but the player base is super low. And I don't expect a new Battlefield game to release anytime soon, or at least do well anytime soon, especially given the fact that there are other games now executing the Battlefield formula in a much better way than Battlefield did with 2042. Halo. I have saved the saddest for the lastest. The success of Halo 1 was no accident. Halo was a powerhouse on all fronts for a couple of reasons. First of all, they brought the beauty of a genre that was already fairly successful in the PC world to the dweebs over at console land. I say dweebs in a loving way, of course, so unbunch your panties. Second, they had a fantastic and incredible story to tell. The lore was extensive and interesting, and the world design really did it justice at the time that it was released. Third, and most importantly, the multiplayer was fun as shit. It was well balanced, it had a good variety of maps, and it introduced regenerative health to the genre. That actually made Halo not only popular, but revolutionary to first-person shooters. I shimmied my way into the games with Halo 3, which blew my little 13-year-old brains away. Some of the best memories I have as a kid was running through the campaign with a buddy, or fighting for a spot on the 16-person custom lobbies after school. It was intense. It was awesome. They got absolutely Liddy McTitty. One of the most impactful memories, though, that I have from the campaign itself is actually the fact that the NPCs would go through their lines without pulling you into a cutscene. You could actively run around and be a part of whatever was going on. That sounds so silly and minuscule now that I say it out loud, but it felt so unique and exciting when it was happening. And then Bungie jumped into the water, abandoning us on a sinking ship. I won't full blame them like that. I did a lot of research on this so that I could speak on it, but please understand that a lot of this is he said, she said after reading quotes and press releases and speculations. So basically what I pieced together was this. Bungie had a very clear idea of what they wanted for Halo and its story, and it was done after 3. I have so much respect for that. I talked about earlier in the video what I think is super important about games that have a story-rich setting is that it comes with a beginning, middle, and end. That's not the series dying, that's just the series becoming fully realized. Once 3 was done, Bungie no longer wanted to make another Halo game for the series, but of course Microsoft couldn't let their most successful title end because that meant an end to their cash flow. ODST and Reach were Bungie's ticket out from underneath Microsoft. It allowed them to plug up some holes in the story while introducing some unique mechanics to the series, and both games were still great and added to the charm of what Halo was always supposed to be, a lore-heavy shooter with badass multiplayer as a cherry on top. Then 343 stepped in. And if I'm honest, I think they did a great job with what they were given. The problem was that they were given a fully realized story that had ended and were told, continue it. That's like hopping on a horse that died of old age and telling it to go. Whatever reincarnated Frankenstein version of the horse that you get to move later on is never going to be as good as the original horse. And that's what Halo 4 and 5 were. Frankenstein Halos. All of the Spartans were supposed to be dead, with Mr. Chief being the last remaining Big Daddy. But no, not really, said 343. There were actually now others somehow. I don't know, they lost me after that, so let's fast forward into Halo Infinite. Holy shit show, Batman. The hype behind this game was real. They showcased insane gameplay with new, refreshed mechanics and good old Mr. Chef. What more could we want as fans of the series? Well, how about a game? They announced the game to be released with the new console, but then delayed it for an entire fucking year. A year! I'm all for delaying a game that isn't ready. One of my favorite video game quotes is from Shigeru Miyamoto. Sorry if I butchered the name. A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. But I'll tell you what, announcing a release too early is a surefire way to waste all the momentum you just built up. Now they threw the game into a pressure cooker, a whole year working on it, and it better be a fucking masterpiece. But it wasn't. One of my favorite descriptions when I was reading through and doing my research for this game was when somebody said it was made from a memory, which is such a fucking accurate statement. The devs had heard that open world games were all the rave, so they abandoned the linear world design and flopped the player into this empty, repetitive open world bullshit. Hey, they used the Ubisoft formula on it. Nice. On top of that, multiplayer played decently but had no progression and very little updates for the first few months after its release, which made it feel abandoned. I don't think Halo will ever stop being Microsoft's biggest game. Like, if you think of Sony and you try to think of their game, it's like, is it God of War, maybe Uncharted, maybe The Last of Us? I don't really know. But you think of Microsoft, you think Halo. So does that mean that Halo can't die? I personally don't think so. Matter of fact, if you ask me, Halo has been dead. But according to many a rumor, a new Halo game is in development. I read somewhere that the budget for this one is significantly lower than Infinite was, which is sad because it deserves better treatment, but a lower budget doesn't mean that it's bad. Look at all the wonderful indie games that we get. I personally don't want another Halo game, but if they can somehow, some way redeem it, which I highly doubt, that would be nice. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that the state of these games and how they went to shit is a reflection of where the gaming industry is at now. And if you've watched the video so far, then you're probably thinking we're fully cooked. I don't think so though, because I see us kind of progressively getting better about keeping these companies accountable for their actions. I've seen this be done more and more over the years. People stopped defending the company's bad practices over time and started actually criticizing these things. And it seems to be catching the attention of the big ones.
They didn't treat their developers like numbers on a spreadsheet. They didn't treat their players as users to exploit. And they didn't make decisions they knew were short-sighted in function of a bonus or politics. They knew that if you put the game and the team first, the revenue will follow.
Anti-consumer practices can only really be effective if we continue to support shit products. So it's important to keep in mind that we can love a company for what they've done in the past, but that doesn't mean that we have to support and eat the shit sandwiches that they sell us in the future. Don't forget that the algorithm gods demand your like sacrifices, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!